Recording. All right, this is a demonstration of one of our emotional stories experiences where person A, in this case Emily, is going to share to person B, Zach, and she's going to share her emotional story. Zach is going to be the one to receive the story, to help develop and hear the story. Any prompts that I use will be directed towards Zach, so he can use those prompts or cues to help Emily with her story or help his understanding. And that's the same model that we'll use on Thursday in our groups, where Emily or Zach will be the monitor of the conversation, prompting person B, the listener, to hear the story of person A. These stories probably will go about 5 minutes or so, and so person B will stay engaged and interact, and of course other folks, while that happens, will observe and think about how that conversation is going. So that's what we're trying to do. So we're going to start this demo off right away. So Emily, you're going to be sharing with Zach. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so my story kind of starts with just knowing that I was a transfer student to Trinity. Back at the school I transferred from, I had lived on campus versus now, I'm a commuter. But so living on campus and everything in the dorm, I was away from home, everything. But yeah, so while I was there in the dorm, I actually got really sick, which is ironic at this time of, pandemic. But so I actually got really sick with pneumonia, and luckily the campus had a health center on campus. So I went to the health center, and they pretty much, ironically again, put me in quarantine and told me not to go to class for about 2 weeks, about a week and a half, 2 weeks. So yeah, I was a little worried about how that might go as far as class goes. So they were all excused absences, but just missing that much in lectures and homework and everything was really stressful.
Okay.
So
So it sounds like you were, at the time, unlike now, you were living at home. No, you weren't living at home. You were living on campus, um, away from home. And then unexpectedly, you got sick with something serious like pneumonia. And that was very anxiety inducing for you to have to deal with this in the middle of a semester. But luckily, you were able to find medical help on campus. I'm curious to know more about what it was like for you to experience that, being away from home, being away from family for the first time.
yeah, it wasn't weirdly, it wasn't as anxiety provoking being away from my family as it was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna miss 2 weeks of class. So it's just thinking about the kind of that constant worry of what is this gonna be like as soon as I get back to class. So yeah, it was definitely anxiety provoking and everything just to have that and to not be able to like go to class and have to worry about 2 weeks of when I should be resting, sitting there worrying about what is it going to be like when I get back. So
Sounds hard.
yeah, it was, but yeah, so then yeah, so the 2 weeks eventually passed, and I had all my absences, excuse me, excused, and so that part, at least I didn't have to worry about attendance grades or anything, so that was good. But yeah, so when I got back to one of my classes, I had first walked in, I had emailed the professor, but he was known for not checking his email regularly. But so I'd emailed him to let him know that I was going to be missing. But when I walked back into the classroom, he pulled me aside as everybody was coming in and kind of started berating me for missing that much class. And saying, I don't know how you can expect to just come back after missing for 2 weeks and expect to get a good grade and everything like that. So yeah, that was definitely really difficult, especially being in front of the rest of the class was in the classroom by then, by the time that he was saying that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So even though you emailed him ahead of time, when you walked into class, it was like he hadn't even looked at his email. It was evident that he had no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
he just went at you, and it sounds like you felt, very isolated, and very attacked,
Hmm.
and maybe very confused at
Right.
the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, that is for sure. Yeah, he did not seem like he had checked his email or anything to know what had happened.
Hmm.
So it was kind of his own confusion and just ignorance of what happened in the situation. So he did not know how to react to that. But yeah, so
Zach,
that was definitely.
I'd like you to prompt Emily about what it was like to be in that situation in front of as the students are coming in, and what it felt like for her.
Okay. So you mentioned that you were pulled aside in front of the whole class, and then the professor talked to you in that way, in front of a bunch of people. I just want to know more about what that was like for you. What did you feel in that time?
Yeah, I felt really embarrassed, I think is probably the most useful word I can think of at this time. Really embarrassed, especially, I mean, it was a very small campus. So, something like this was something that the class continued to talk about outside of the class as well. So then it became known across the campus that the professor had, like berated this girl who had to miss class. And so it kind of became like that story, even all across the campus, was about what had happened. So it definitely felt really embarrassing to know that, oh, that was me.
Yeah.
And the
And
most embarrassing thing about that was,
You think that for you the most embarrassing thing about that situation for you was?
just the fact that it was kind of like everyone was talking about me, even though they were more focused on what the professor had done. It was, like what the professor acted in a way that was not a way that a professor should act.
Yeah.
So even though they were focused on that, it was just embarrassing because it was like, okay, everyone's talking about me right now,
Yeah.
and about like kind of making me relive that moment that I had felt
Mhm.
embarrassed and really like isolated and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, afterwards, yeah, after that had happened, when I tried to explain to the professor what had happened and why I had missed everything, of course, at the time, like that day, I just went and sat down in the classroom and just tried to just be in that bubble, and just kind of ignore what had just happened,
What
just
was
in
it like for
shock.
you? Yeah. What was it like for you to then have to sit down and experience class with this professor after that had happened?
It weirdly felt almost like a regular class just because I think I had not fully processed what had just happened. So, yeah, it was just kind of that initial shock of
Right.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, afterwards, like after that had happened, I brought that to the attention of someone else and was able to sit down and I had a dialogue with this professor, again, which was very difficult to face for sure.
Yeah.
Just a lot of source of emotions there, but
Yeah.
it was kind of written off a little bit as, oh, the professor didn't mean it like that, even though that was what had happened and that's what I had experienced. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely difficult to kind of have that almost written off a little bit,
Mm.
where, like what it was like, oh, he didn't mean it, so it's okay. And I was like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so
So
that
it
was.
sounds like you had the opportunity to actually process this again, with a person, um, face to face, but ultimately, it sounds like your issues were minimized, and
Mhm.
it sounds like that experience was, maybe, maybe there was some fear there of having to face this again and face this person again, but also it sounds like the result was very frustrating for you, considering how
Yeah,
you felt in the moment and afterwards.
right. It definitely was really frustrating when that was kind of written off like that. Um, but yeah, so that was definitely difficult, and I think for the rest of the semester, back in that class, after I had had that initial like moment of shock of just sitting in the class and being in the class, I was often really afraid to go back to that class at all. And that actually left a lingering thing for me, even that continues like now sometimes, that I am afraid to miss like even one class, even if it's a different professor or anything. Obviously, this didn't happen at Trinity, so it is always different professors, but so I'm always afraid to miss even one class, because then I'm afraid if I come back after missing one,
Mhm.
then like something like this might happen again. So it's definitely
Yeah.
left like a lingering scar, as far as me with professors now. So
Zach, see if you can do a kind of a summary wrap up reflection for Emily.
Yeah. Okay. So really, it sounds like yeah, overall, you had a really difficult experience with a professor where you you were brought out of class through circumstances that are outside of your control, and you tried to communicate as best you could, but the professor did not receive that communication, and ultimately berated you for doing your best under the circumstances. And that was really embarrassing for you because it was done in front of your peers, and it continued to be a topic of conversation outside of class. And then when you had the opportunity to confront the professor about it, it was minimized, and that was really frustrating for you. And as a result, since then, you have continued to have to deal with this anxiety of what if I miss class and the professor doesn't understand. Um, you might have to face that issue again, and so you've had to work through um, dealing with that anxiety.
hmm yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you
we're
for
gonna
sharing
we're
that.
gonna end our story at that point and do a little debriefing before we wrap this up. Um, Participants, Emily, we'll start with you.
Yeah.
How was that experience sharing your story? Oh, by the way,
Yeah.
this won't necessarily be something we'll do with everybody on Thursday. Maybe some quick debriefing, make sure everyone's okay, or some components that we might want to emphasize. But we're doing this uh, broader debriefing for the benefit of the 220 students who are watching. Okay, Emily, your thoughts about how it went?
Yeah. I mean, it's always difficult, I think, to, relive something that had happened that was emotionally charged and everything, but it is something I'm trying to get better at personally. But yeah, so I think Zach did really well, like trying to help, direct me in the story and everything, because I know I sometimes tend to talk a little more than necessary, but he helped me stop to analyze everything, and like what emotions were behind each part of what happened. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't have to do a lot of prompting of Zach as he stepped in different times, so I was able to let it run a little bit more. Zach, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's always um, nerve wracking to be in the position of trying to make sure that the person who's sharing their emotions is cared for well.
Mhm.
I think for me, the biggest anxieties were obviously knowing when to step in. Because I mean, I think I going into it, I knew I was like, I'm going to have to just sometimes just stop her and go for it, and trust that she'll understand. That'll be helpful. And then I think just yeah, being able to figure out as a story is developing, what are the points that I want to emphasize? What are the points that I want to pull something out of? Do I wait to see if there's more, or do I stop and do things? But overall, I felt good about how I handled that.
Yeah, there was two components of the story. One was initially being sick and being out of the loop and feeling anxious about that. There's some feeling there that you tapped into, But then, of course, the main thrust of the story was the experience with the professor when she came back, and that's where you want to focus. That's the main part to develop the emotional aspect, which includes things like what was that like, reflecting feelings of embarrassment, um, allowing the sharer to not just hit it and move along and go on to, well, then I, went on with my life and comments were made around campus, but to say, tell me more about what that was like when you were in that situation. That's one reason why I prompted that, to kind of deepen the opportunity for Emily to talk about that. Obviously, there's a third component, which is the buzz around campus, which is overall inconvenient and embarrassing. And that's another place where you can kind of just find out what was it like for her at that moment. But the crux of the story, and you don't always know this going in, you're watching the story unfold, was the experience with the professor when she came back from illness. So that's how it went. For the 220 people watching this, we went about 7 minutes during the actual story, which is about right, or maybe on the outside. So what we want to do with our stories is move into the background. Here's what's going on, but get to the major issue this relatively soon. There may be some other components that need to come out first to give sense to the more significant or emotional part. Sometimes it's a double whammy. There's a piece that comes in and that's pretty heavy, and then there's a second piece that comes in that's really heavy, and the listener doesn't know, and we're just trying to explore the stories. So that's kind of where it's going. So hope that's helpful. This is how we'll try to proceed with our stories one-on-one on Thursday. So I'm going to stop recording here and try to get this ready for you to see.